They thought she was gone. They thought the desert had swallowed her whole. What they didn't know was that she was coming back. The dog named Crow ran ahead across the endless dusty plains, his black streak cutting through the sunlight like a shadow that belonged to the earth. He never barked without reason, and only moved with purpose when danger or need called. The wind shifted against the scattered ruins of Sundown County, and Crow paused, nose in the dirt, ears high, silent but insistent. Wade Cridge rode 30 miles from the last known settlement, following the dog through jagged terrain littered with skeletal trees and rusted fence posts, skulls tangled in wire, boots half buried in sand, remnants of lives long forgotten. Every step the horse took stirred the dust, whispering the secrets of the lost and the forsaken, and Wade felt the weight of history pressing against him, thick and heavy as the midday sun. Crow moved ahead, loping through cactus shade and broken earth, agile and confident as if he could sense more than the living man could see. Wade clicked his tongue, a low sound carried by the wind, urging the horse forward. The world stretched like a canvas of silence and danger, the earth cracked and dry, the horizon wavering with heat waves, the air carrying a smell of old blood and dust that had not moved in decades. Crow stopped abruptly beside a boulder, tail stiff, ears forward. Wade dismounted, boots soft in the dirt, careful not to disturb what had been left alone too long. There she lay, curled against the shadow, pale, broken, half buried in the dust, her dress torn, hair tangled and matted, skin marked by earth and bruises. She moved slightly, a flutter of life, a breath fragile as paper. Crow sat at her side, eyes sharp, observing, protective. Wade knelt beside her, hand hovering near her mouth, wetting her lips to coax air into her lungs. A small cough rose from her chest, dust lifting in the morning sun, and she tried to move again, failing. Her arms fell limply, and Wade lifted her gently onto the saddle, securing her with rope. She was light, hollowed by suffering, a girl who had been broken by something too immense for her young bones. Crow ran ahead, leading the way through the sparse trees and rocks, as if he knew exactly where she needed to go. Wade followed, heart pounding with urgency, guiding the horse through terrain he had not visited since rains had torn the roofs from old hunting shacks. They reached a small cabin tucked behind cottonwoods, hidden from the world, a place Wade knew would keep her safe for the moment. He set her on the cot inside, removing what remained of her dress to clean and bandage the wounds with strips of his shirt, using whiskey to wash infections and burns. The room smelled of dust and decay, the light of the hearth low and uneven, casting shadows that seemed to twist and stretch across the walls. Crow curled at the foot of the cot, head resting on his paws, watching every breath and twitch of the girl as if he understood the magnitude of what had been endured and what was to come. Wade worked silently, tending to bramble cuts, broken ankles, ribs too sharp beneath thin skin, the scratches and bruises telling the story of a girl hunted and left for death. 2 days passed before her eyes opened fully, revealing a deep green that held a kind of knowing beyond her years, as if she had seen both death and survival in equal measure. She spoke little, her gaze cautious, scanning the room, the dog, Wade, the shadows that danced with each flicker of firelight. Wade offered her water, and she drank quietly, taking the gift without question, a silent acknowledgement of trust that had to be earned slowly. He asked her if she knew where she was, and she shook her head, not remembering her name, her family, her life before this moment of rescue. Wade noticed the circular scar on her inner wrist, a mark that was deliberate, symbolic, something he had seen once long ago on a letter with a seal burned into its wax. His heart shifted, recognition cutting through the haze of the present. In another life, before cattle drives and gunfights, before years of solitude and survival, he had been promised to a girl from East Missouri, Ruth Vexley. The miniature painted on the back of a letter, the burn on the wax seal, the promise made by families and bound by circumstances beyond his understanding, all came rushing back. He had not thought of her in years, Never again after she disappeared. And yet here she was, marked by the same symbol, her body broken but alive, her eyes holding a depth he remembered without memory. Wade tended her carefully, feeding her water and steadying her trembling body. She tried to stand, faltered, and sat again, the energy and strength having been stripped from her by the harshness of the world and the cruelty of those who had hunted her. Crow remained vigilant, following every movement, alert to the smallest sound beyond the walls of the shack. Wade let the silence stretch between them, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, the whisper of the wind outside, the distant cry of a bird that seemed to mark the moment. The girl began to twitch her fingers when Crow left to chase a rabbit, showing a small spark of life and awareness returning to her, a connection between her and the dog that neither had needed words to establish. She slept with her hands curled like claws, trembling in dreams he could not yet interpret. Wade watched, learning the rhythms of recovery, the ways of trust slowly rebuilt. On the morning of the 6th day, she finally rose on her own. Wade gave her his old shirt to wear, tied with a belt to keep the torn fabric in place, and she accepted it without a word, her movements precise, quiet, full of the knowledge of someone who had learned to survive beyond the ordinary. Wade suggested. She needed a name, and she chose Ruth, as if it had always been hers. Crow whimpered softly, a sound of understanding and approval, and the room fell into a strange stillness. The girl had survived, had awakened, and the path of recovery, of reckoning, of reclaiming what had been taken, had begun. Days turned into a week, and Ruth began to walk without assistance, to observe the land, the animal tracks, the trails beyond, the shack. Wade guided her, teaching her how to aim, how to hold a weapon, the rhythm of the horse beneath her as they explored nearby creeks and hills. Crow was always ahead, scouting, protective, faithful to the girl whose life had been spared, by fate and by his insistence. Wade did not ask her to speak of what had been endured or lost. He let her discover strength and movement, letting the world present itself slowly, carefully, in a way that Ruth could reclaim without force. At night, she studied the circular burn on her wrist, turning it in the firelight, tracing its edges with fingers that had learned to be precise and deliberate. It became a compass, a reminder of a promise long past and a mission just beginning. Wade watched, silent, understanding that the girl before him was no longer only a victim. She was someone who would reclaim what was lost, who would fight back, against a world that had tried to erase her existence. He slept near the cot, rifle across his lap, eyes flicking to every shadow, aware that the world beyond the shack would not remain quiet for long. Crow curled at the foot of the bed, the shadow of loyalty and vigilance, knowing that this girl, Ruth, was meant to walk a path he could only help illuminate but not command. The days that followed brought subtle progress. Ruth's strength grew. She moved with purpose, her gaze sharp and unflinching. Wade guided her training with a careful hand, teaching her to shoot, to track, to read the land. Crow remained constant, a bridge between past trauma and present survival. She learned quickly, taking the revolver with the natural ease of someone who had no room for error. Her eyes hardened, her hands became steady, her body resilient. Wade observed the transformation quietly, knowing that the reckoning had already begun within her, and the world that had left her broken would soon be forced to reckon as well. The sun rose over the shack, washing the dust and broken walls in golden light. Ruth stirred on the cot, fingers brushing the fabric of Wade's shirt, tracing the patterns of torn cloth, the faint scent of smoke and leather lingering in the air. She blinked slowly, green eyes widening as the shadows shifted across the floor. And for a moment, the world seemed too vast and too quiet. Crow padded across the room, his paws silent against the wooden floor, stopping beside her. He nudged her hand with his muzzle, eyes steady and intelligent, as if reminding her that she was not alone and that the path ahead demanded awareness, courage, and action. Wade watched from across the room, quiet, patient, letting her rise at her own pace, letting her measure the space between fear and trust. She sat up slowly, muscles trembling from disuse, bones sore from the days of neglect and abuse she had endured. The room smelled of dust, smoke, and the lingering sharp tang of blood washed away by time and care. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the sting of scratches and bruises, and her gaze fell on the circular mark burned into her inner wrist. The burn was pale and hard, a constant reminder of something deliberate, something old, something that had survived beyond memory. She traced the edge with careful fingertips, eyes narrowing, and the pieces of the past began to stir in her mind. Fragments and shadows, smells and shapes, names half remembered. Wade approached, slow and deliberate, giving her space while observing the flicker of recognition in her expression. She met his eyes, green against brown, steady and searching, and in that gaze he saw the echo of a promise long past, a name that had been whispered into silence, a life stolen and returned by sheer chance and loyalty. He offered her water, and she drank, slow and deliberate, tasting the coolness of survival after the dryness of neglect. Her lips parted, words unformed, but the air between them carried meaning enough. She was aware, alive, and beginning to reclaim herself. Crow rose and padded to the door, sniffing the wind outside, alert to threats and opportunities alike. Ruth's eyes followed him, noting the precision, the focus, the quiet intelligence. The dog had guided her to life, to safety, and now he became a guide for purpose, a bridge between what had been stolen and what she could take back. Wade watched, sensing the spark of something dangerous yet righteous igniting in her. The girl before him was no longer only Ruth Vexley. She was something sharper, quicker, and capable of demanding the world acknowledge her existence. Days turned to training. Wade taught her to shoot, to breathe steadily, to handle the revolver as if it were an extension of her own hand. Crow followed every step, circling ahead and watching behind, protective and insistent. Ruth learned fast. Her hands, once trembling, from hunger and fear, became steady, precise, confident. Her stance grew strong, her shoulders squared, her back straightened. She practiced with broken bottles, rusted tin, and the remnants of farm tools, learning the weight of each shot and the sound of impact. Wade adjusted her grip when needed, reminded her to breathe, observed her posture and resolve, never underestimating, the resilience returning to her bones. She did not speak much, but her eyes watched constantly, cataloging every movement, every sound, every shadow. The shack became a training ground and a refuge, a place where survival was learned through repetition and focus. She studied Crow, following his instincts, observing how he read the wind, the earth, and the signs of danger. She began to anticipate threats before they appeared, moving with a quiet grace, a predator learning from another predator. Wade allowed her autonomy, stepping back when necessary, knowing that this was her journey, her path of reclaiming what had been stolen, her apprenticeship in vengeance and justice. The past began to surface. Ruth remembered fragments of captivity, the faces of those who had hunted her, the smell of smoke and fear, the feel of rope and bruises. Each memory sharpened her purpose, hardening her resolve. She asked Wade little about what had been done to her. She did not need the details to fuel the fire burning inside. Her body, once frail and broken, became a weapon. Her mind, once clouded with confusion and loss, became a map of intent and precision. Crow remained her constant companion, his presence a reminder of the loyalty and guidance that had carried her from death to life. One morning, as the sun cut across the hills and painted long shadows on the ground, Ruth approached Wade, eyes steady, green, and unflinching. She lifted her wrist, showing the burn mark to the firelight, turning it slowly until the edges caught the glow. Wade's chest tightened. He had seen that mark once on a folded letter with his name burned into the corner, a promise and a memory intertwined, a piece of a life thought lost. Ruth's eyes held questions he could not yet answer, a mixture of recognition and inquiry, of understanding and anticipation. She did not speak, waiting for acknowledgement, and Wade nodded, silent but affirmative. He had understood long ago that some truths needed to be lived before being spoken. She began tracking. Crow led her through trails, over hills, across creek beds, and along the old ridges that had been trodden by hunters and killers alike. She learned the way of the land, the signs of movement, the subtle hints of presence and absence, of danger, lurking beyond the visible. Wade taught her to read the terrain as he had learned through years of cattle drives and gunfights, teaching her to anticipate the motions of those who would seek to harm or control. She absorbed it all, like a shadow learning the contours of the night. As the days passed, Ruth became faster, quieter, sharper. Her movements were precise and deliberate, calculated and confident. Crow remained her guide, a silent observer, a constant presence, a reminder of survival and purpose. Wade provided guidance when needed, watching her develop into someone no longer only surviving, but commanding the world with presence and force. The shack became a place of transformation, a crucible where brokenness was forged into skill and resolve. Ruth began to confront her memories. Faces emerged from the fog of captivity, names whispered on the wind, faint echoes of voices and commands, threats and promises that had been left unresolved. Each recollection honed her focus, each fragment of memory shaping the direction of her movement, her aim, her purpose. She trained with precision, incorporating lessons from Crow's instincts, Wade's guidance, and her own memory of fear and survival. Her resolve became as solid as the earth beneath her boots. It was during one quiet evening when the sun was low and the wind carried the scent of dust and distant fires that Ruth approached Wade with determination. She was ready to seek those who had stolen her, to confront the past directly. Her eyes, green and unyielding, met his. The firelight danced across her face, illuminating the resolve and fury coiled within. Crow growled softly at her side, affirming her readiness, marking the shift from recovery to pursuit. Wade handed her the revolver. Old and blackened, the weight familiar and natural in her hands. She tested it, practiced with deliberate aim, and Wade observed quietly, knowing that the girl before him was ready to move beyond the shack, beyond safety, into the reckoning that awaited. She rode out with Crow leading, Wade behind, the plains, stretching before them, empty but charged with possibility. The wind carried the smell of dust and distant danger, and the hills whispered of those who had thought themselves safe, unaware that Ruth had returned, not as the victim she had once been, but as an agent of justice and consequence. Each step of the horse echoed across the plains, a signal to the world that reckoning was on its way. Ruth's hands tightened on the reins, her eyes scanning the horizon, the terrain, the distant signs of movement. Crow ran ahead, nostrils flaring, alert to every sound, every motion, every scent. Wade remained behind, rifle ready, observing, protecting, guiding when necessary, allowing her to assert control, allowing the world to understand that the balance of power had shifted. The shack, the cot, the small cabin behind the cottonwoods all became memories, symbols of survival, and points of departure. Ruth was moving forward, and the ghosts of the past would not escape her pursuit. The first target appeared on the horizon, a figure half buried in brush, unaware, vulnerable. Ruth crouched low in the saddle, eyes narrowing, aiming with deliberate precision. Crow growled softly, urging caution, presence, and awareness. Wade steadied, ready to assist, but knew she would not falter. The shot rang out, echoing across the valley, precise, clean, and deliberate. The path had begun, the journey from broken survival to active pursuit unfolding, every step measured, every breath controlled, every movement purposeful. Ruth was no longer a victim. She was a force, and the world that had wronged her would soon reckon with the presence of one who could not be ignored. The landscape stretched harsh and unforgiving, jagged ridges cutting the horizon, sun beating, down with merciless heat. Ruth rode with Crow ahead, alert to every movement, every sound, the wind carrying whispers of danger. Wade followed behind, rifle steady, eyes scanning for threats. Every mile brought them closer to the sundown riders. The men who had taken her from childhood fractured her life and left her to survive in a world that had forgotten mercy. The plains were empty but alive with memories, each tree, rock, and ridge holding a trace of past violence, a signal to those who had thought her gone that she was returning. Her hands gripped the reins with a quiet intensity, the revolver at her hip a constant reminder of control and purpose. The first signs appeared at dusk, a figure half buried beneath brush, horse gone, abandoned as if the world had discarded them. Ruth dismounted silently, moving with the skill she had honed over weeks, a shadow in the fading light. She approached cautiously, eyes scanning for hidden threats, body coiled for action. Crow padded behind, alert and steady, nose to the ground, ears forward. The figure did not move, and Ruth recognized the emblem etched into a coin, a token of the sundown riders. Her pulse quickened, but her movements remained controlled, precise. She lifted the coin from the fallen man's pocket, tracing the symbol, burned into the metal, confirmation of what she already knew. Wade stepped forward, rifle raised, protective yet allowing her the autonomy to confront what had been done. Ruth signaled with a small movement of her hand, commanding Crow to circle, and she moved toward the camp she had traced, the one hidden among sheer cliffs and twisted iron stakes from old mines. Every step was deliberate, measured, calculated. She knew the terrain now, knew the signs of movement, the shifts in wind and shadow. Crow ran ahead, alert to every sound, every scent, a guide through the treacherous path. Wade followed, silent, steady, watching the transformation of the girl he had rescued into a force of reckoning. The camp lay ahead, firelight flickering against tents and shadows, men moving without suspicion. Ruth crouched low, observing, analyzing, planning. 2 sentries moved along the edge, unaware, distracted, and she acted. The first fell silently, a precise shot through the eye, the second slain before he could cry alarm. Crow leapt, tearing a third from its footing, forcing the rest into chaos. Wade's rifle barked once, clean and deliberate, and the camp erupted into confusion. Ruth moved through the firelight with a predator's grace, her revolver steady, eyes unwavering. One man staggered forward, hands raised, recognition in his eyes. He named her, and the moment hung suspended in air and smoke. She nodded, confirming memory, confirming justice, confirming survival. The world had taken, and now she reclaimed. They burned the camp, freed the captives, buried the fallen where possible, leaving no trace of the cruelty that had taken root. There. Ruth moved through the chaos, steady, unyielding, focused. Wade assisted where needed, protecting, observing, understanding that this was her reckoning, her justice, her war, and that his role was to guide and preserve, not to dominate or dictate. Crow remained loyal, alert, a constant shadow of vigilance and loyalty. The camp smoldered behind them, fire licking the night sky, signals of the past destroyed, but memories and consequences lingering, shaping the path forward. Ruth's eyes never left the horizon. Each man, each act of cruelty, each betrayal mapped itself onto her mind, forming a roadmap for vengeance and reclamation. She remembered her father, the man who had orchestrated her disappearance, who had profited from the silence of others, who had left her for death. The realization hardened her resolve, her pulse steady, her movements deliberate. She spoke little, acting with precision and certainty. Wade observed, silent, understanding that the girl he had rescued was no longer only Ruth Vexley. She was a force reshaping the landscape of justice, consequence, and survival. The trail led to St. Ellison, a town polished and perfumed, hiding sins beneath veneer and civility. The streets were quiet at first, then filled with the false noise of prosperity and indifference. Ruth moved deliberately, observing, calculating, tracing her father's complicity through ledgers, deeds, and whispers. Crow padded at her side, alert to the dangers hidden in plain sight, nose lifting at the faintest trace of the past. Wade remained behind, rifle wrapped, finger resting near the trigger, allowing her the initiative, letting her assert control over what had been stolen. Inside the courthouse, Ruth worked methodically, finding the ledger desk, prying drawers, tracing the papers and signatures that had facilitated betrayal and death. Each page, each name, each mark solidified her understanding of the network of greed and cruelty that had taken her family, her childhood, and countless others. She tore the pages when necessary, leaving behind the remnants of deceit, ensuring that the evidence of wrongdoing was marked by her presence and not left to chance. Wade observed, silent, acknowledging her autonomy and her judgment. The search led them to the brothel where Clive Doran operated, the man who had overseen part of her disappearance and trafficking. Ruth approached with Crow by her side, hands steady, eyes fixed on the target. Wade remained just beyond, protective but distant, allowing her to assert dominance over her past. The confrontation was precise, deliberate, swift. Doran's attempts at resistance were met with calculated action, and he fell, subdued and marked by the consequences of the world he had created. Ruth did not speak, only acted, allowing the past to resolve itself through precise and controlled movement. The final confrontation was with Matthias Templeton, the man who had purchased her family's land, who had signed her death into law through silence and bureaucracy. Ruth entered the mansion with Crow ahead, Wade supporting from the shadows, observing. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with unspoken history and consequence. Templeton's eyes were hollow, recognition flickering but insufficient. Ruth acted decisively, precise, controlled, delivering justice not in words but in action. Wade assisted where necessary, guiding, protecting, but allowing her to carry out the reclamation herself. Crow remained vigilant, his presence a constant, reminder of loyalty, guidance, and survival. After the confrontations, Ruth and Wade departed, leaving the mansions, the towns, and the remnants of cruelty behind them. The path north called, toward the hills and the lands that had not been stolen, the places where survival, justice, and reclamation intersected. Ruth carried the lessons of the past, the skills honed through suffering, and the strength forged through survival. Crow remained loyal, leading, guiding, protective. Wade observed, silent, understanding that the girl he had rescued had become a force capable of shaping the world and meting out justice where it was due. They rode through storms and dust, through hills and valleys, tracking remnants of injustice, rescuing those left behind, ensuring that the world that had taken so much would be accountable. Ruth trained Elsie, teaching her skills of survival, tracking, and precision, ensuring that the next generation would carry awareness, strength, and vigilance. Wade worked behind the scenes, building networks of protection and observation, aiding the silent army that Ruth quietly raised, the ash mark, a symbol of survival and consequence, growing in presence and awareness. The journey stretched through the seasons, summer heat baking the plains, winter winds cutting sharp and relentless. Each day brought new challenges, new discoveries, new moments of confrontation. Ruth's resolve never wavered. Her eyes were steady, her hands precise, her movements deliberate. Crow remained ever present, a shadow of loyalty and instinct, a constant reminder of the path she had been guided toward. Wade remained patient, protective, understanding that the girl he had saved had grown beyond simple survival into an agent of justice, consequence, and reclamation. The work was relentless, but Ruth embraced it, her body and mind in harmony, her senses honed through experience and necessity. She moved through towns, hills, and abandoned buildings with confidence, her presence signaling the reckoning to come. Crow led, Wade followed, and the people they aided or confronted understood the shift in power, the weight of consequence now carried by those who had been wronged and survived. By the time they returned to the cabin, the fire of purpose burned. Within Ruth, controlled and deliberate. She trained, observed, and planned, ensuring that every action taken had precision, consequence, and meaning. Wade supported silently. Crow remained ever vigilant, and the world slowly adjusted to the presence of a force that could not be ignored. The past had been confronted, the guilty marked, and the lessons passed on to those who would carry them forward. The ash marks spread quietly, symbolizing survival, strength, and vigilance, and Ruth prepared for the final chapters of her journey, aware that the work of justice was never complete, but always necessary. The morning sun rose pale and cold over the hills, cutting the shadows long and sharp. Ruth stood at the edge of the clearing, Crow at her side, nose lifting to catch the wind. She could feel the remnants of the past in every ridge, every tree, every trail. Wade had saddled the horses, his eyes scanning the horizon, steady and vigilant. The cabin behind them was quiet, the work of weeks spent training and reclaiming having left it ordered, yet still carrying the ghosts of survival. Ruth mounted slowly, eyes steady, reflecting the calm before the final storm. Crow circled ahead, alert, ears forward, muscles coiled like springs, signaling the world that nothing would be taken unchallenged today. Wade followed behind, rifle strapped, eyes tracing every shadow, every movement, knowing that the culmination of their journey would demand all their focus, skill, and precision. Their path led to Stonewater, the mining town where the darkness of human greed had once festered unchecked. The streets were empty, buildings sagging under years of neglect, the dust of decay settling over abandoned storefronts and shattered windows. Ruth moved like a ghost, silent and deliberate, Crow padding at her side, alert to danger, sensing every presence, marking every subtle shift in the air. Wade remained in the rear, protective, allowing her initiative, knowing that the moment demanded her judgment and her resolve. Each step into the town was measured, deliberate, and unflinching, a silent warning to those who had forgotten that survival could be reclaimed and justice exacted. They found the miners who had once suffered under Cyrus Hobbs' control, men whose lives had been twisted by fear, oppression, and silence. Ruth approached them quietly, her presence commanding attention without a word. She offered no promises of reward, only direction, guidance, and an assurance that those who had inflicted pain would be confronted. Crow's low growl punctuated the air, a reminder that the past would not remain buried. The miners nodded, their eyes wide, hope flickering in the spaces where fear had previously lived. Ruth taught them to move with purpose, to act decisively, to reclaim the power that had been stolen. Wade watched silently, seeing the transformation in both the girl he had rescued and the men who would stand with her. As night fell, the shadows deepened, stretching across rooftops and alleys, the moon rising pale and watchful. Ruth moved through the town, guided by memory, by instinct, and by the signs that Crow sniffed from the wind and ground. Each encounter was precise, deliberate, and controlled. Guards were incapacitated, captives freed, and the oppressive hold of the mining company dismantled quietly, efficiently, leaving no chance for retaliation or escape. Wade supported from the shadows, protecting, guiding, observing, ensuring that every action had consequence, precision, and meaning. The work was relentless, but Ruth carried it with focus, her body and mind aligned with purpose and justice. By dawn, the fires of confrontation had faded, the town liberated from the grasp of cruelty and exploitation. Ruth stood at the edge of the clearing outside Stonewater, her eyes scanning the horizon, the light illuminating the green of her eyes, the lines of determination on her face, and the hard, pale circle of her burn mark glinting in the sunlight. Crow padded at her side, his tail low but steady, eyes bright with awareness and loyalty. Wade approached, rifle lowered, boots silent on the dust, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey completed and the victories won. They moved toward the hills beyond, carrying with them the freed captives, the knowledge of survival, and the weight of justice fulfilled. The journey continued through valleys and ridges, rivers and plains, each step deliberate, precise, and purposeful. Ruth trained Elsie, the young girl rescued from captivity, teaching her survival, awareness, and precision, ensuring that the lessons of the past would extend into the future. Wade assisted where needed, protective but not overbearing, allowing Ruth to assert authority and guide the path forward. Crow remained ever vigilant, leading, marking, protecting, and guiding both women through a landscape that had been harsh and cruel, but now became a place where justice could be enacted and survival sustained. In the quiet of the evening, Ruth, Wade, and Elsie camped in the remnants of an abandoned chapel, firelight flickering across broken stone and fallen pews. Ruth knelt beside the girl, showing her how to fashion tools, tie leather, and mark the terrain for signs of movement and danger. Crow curled at their feet, ears twitching, alert to the smallest shift in wind or sound. Wade tended the fire, keeping watch, listening, observing, providing guidance only when necessary, respecting Ruth's authority and the purpose that had been forged through months of training, survival, and justice. The days passed in a rhythm of movement and vigilance, training and preparation, observing and acting. Ruth taught Elsie to track, to disappear, to survive, to act with purpose and precision. Crow remained her constant companion, a guide and sentinel. Wade supported, protective, but allowing autonomy, understanding that the legacy of survival, justice, and consequence would extend through Ruth and those she trained. The ash mark, symbolizing the burned promise and reclaimed power, became a sign of vigilance, awareness, and strength carried by those who had survived and those who would continue the work. Finally, the time came to return to Hollow Creek, the cabin where their journey had begun. Ruth rode ahead, Crow at her side, eyes steady and watchful, the land stretching in rolling hills and valleys, the wind carrying the scent of dust, grass, and distant memories. Wade followed, ensuring the path was clear, supporting, protecting, observing. Elsie rode behind, learning, absorbing, training, understanding that survival, awareness, and justice required skill, precision, and patience. The cabin appeared on the horizon, familiar yet altered, holding the memory of survival, training, and transformation. Inside, they worked to rebuild, restore, and organize, ensuring that the cabin served as both sanctuary and training ground. Ruth observed every detail, moving deliberately, teaching, correcting, refining. Crow patrolled the perimeter, alert to any intrusions or threats. Wade assisted where necessary, reinforcing skills, ensuring readiness, supporting but allowing Ruth to maintain authority. The cabin became a place of legacy, of preparation, of awareness, ensuring that the knowledge, skill, and vigilance cultivated through experience would endure and spread. In the evenings, Ruth reflected on the journey. The lives reclaimed, the past confronted, the injustice corrected. She observed Elsie practicing with the tools, tracking signs, moving with precision. Crow lay nearby, ears twitching, ever watchful, a silent reminder of loyalty and guidance. Wade leaned against the porch rail, observing, acknowledging the growth, resilience, and purpose that had emerged through months of struggle, survival, and reclaiming. The ash mark remained visible on Ruth's wrist, a symbol of consequence, vigilance, and the life reclaimed. The final lesson was one of continuity. Ruth handed Elsie a piece of leather, showing her how to cut it into a ribbon, yellow, a symbol of vigilance, survival, and awareness. She explained the importance of observation, patience, and precision, teaching her that the world could take much, but could not strip away skill, intelligence, or resolve. Crow remained a constant presence, reinforcing lessons, guiding, teaching, through presence and instinct. Wade observed, proud, understanding that the work of justice and survival extended beyond individual action, into legacy, mentorship, and continuity. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Ruth, Wade, and Elsie stood together, the cabin behind them, the land stretching ahead, alive with the memory of survival and the promise of vigilance. Crow padded. Between them, tail low, ears forward, alert to every movement, every sound, a living symbol of loyalty, guidance, and continuity. The world had been harsh, cruel, and unyielding, but through skill, precision, and consequence, they had reclaimed agency, restored balance, and ensured that survival and justice would endure. The journey was not complete. There would always be new threats, new injustices, new challenges. But Ruth, now fully realized, skilled, and vigilant, would meet them with purpose, precision, and resolve. Wade would remain supportive, protective, guiding, mentoring. Crow would continue to lead, observe, and protect. Elsie would grow, learning, absorbing, preparing, carrying forward the lessons of vigilance, survival, and justice. The ash mark would endure, a symbol of survival, consequence, and legacy. And as the fire crackled in the cabin, shadows dancing across walls, scarred by history and reclaimed by determination, Ruth raised her eyes to the horizon, the wind brushing through her hair, green eyes steady and unwavering. She understood that the world would continue, as it always did, and that vigilance, justice, and survival required constant presence, observation, and action. She turned to Wade and Elsie, and in the silent understanding between them, knew that they were ready, that the journey would continue, that the world would reckon with their presence. And for those who follow the story, remember to subscribe for more tales of survival, justice, and the courage to reclaim what was once taken, to witness the journeys of those who face impossible odds and emerge not only alive, but prepared to shape the world with purpose, skill, and determination.